our bucket get drunk day in aid of?
In aid of?
Well, you know, people do a minute's silence, they hold hands, they sing, they protest, and I think this is a fine thing to do in aid of something.
I think we should do it in aid of the inflamed sense of fear that's striking the country as ISIS and Ebola loom.
Okay, it's in aid of ISIS and Ebola. It can't be in aid of fear. That doesn't make sense.
It's sort of in aid. It's in recognition of the you know, the frailty of the collective consciousness of the minds of the UK and US citizens.
Okay, what he said. Good. That's what we're doing, and if you have one near you, join us in having a drink, and hopefully we'll have a lovely time. So Joel, what's on your mind? Tell me.
The idea of
Today.
a psychonaut.
The psychonaut. So is that somebody who is psychologically zero, or is that somebody
No,
who goes into space
a
of the
psychonaut
mind?
is someone who explores different states of consciousness. So a psychonaut.
Am I a psychonaut?
By meditating, you are yourself a psychonaut.
Cool.
I mean,
For those who don't know, I am a very loose participant.
a
in
psychonaut, described as a sailor of the mind/soul, refers to a methodology for describing and explaining the subjective effects of altered states of consciousness, including those induced by meditation or mind-altering circumstances.
Cool. Yeah, as I was saying a couple of seconds ago, I meditate. I try and meditate every morning for about 10 minutes. Nothing special, just sitting down, getting comfortable, and listening to my breath as much as I can. It sounds stupid, but it's, I find, very effective. And, you know.
What are you trying to achieve? A state of blankness? Or are you trying to achieve a state of higher awareness?
Sam Harris would say that meditation is training for your mind's ability to control thoughts as they arise. So rather than just sitting back and being hostage to the random arising of thoughts in your mind, that you can, just like you exercise and build muscle, you can exercise your mind by meditating to build mental muscle and have control over your thoughts, what thoughts arise and how and when.
Wouldn't that possibly lead to repression?
That is a really interesting idea. I mean, when you there was a really interesting, actually no, not interesting. There was a really upsetting argument recently on the Bill Maher show. Do you watch it? I can't remember what it's called. Bill Maher,
aware of it.
Real Time with Bill Maher.
Yeah, I'm aware of it. Yeah.
And it was the most interesting people were Sam Harris and Batman. Ben Affleck, and they were talking obviously about Islam and ISIS, and Ben Affleck was, I as an actor I love him, he's great, but he was just consumed by anger and not so much hatred as, you know, when people mock their opponents, they denigrate them, they personally attack them. It wasn't like he hated Sam Harris as, you know, an enemy would hate somebody, but he had just this real dislike, and he was just dissing him really badly, but, you know, celebrity to celebrity. And Sam Harris, on the other hand, was, he just seemed to be absolutely in control. A lot of people were throwing a lot of things at him and at his ideas, but he always seemed to not rise to personal attacks or to what you might call personal attacks against his ideas, and would, it's hard to explain. He seemed to be exactly what he tries to do, i.e. to be in control of where his train of thought goes. So he wouldn't allow himself to be sidetracked. He would be constantly on the point of the discussion, and he would be able very quickly to articulate what he wanted to say, which I don't know whether the corollary of that is repression. I suppose it would have to be, because if his initial reaction would be to react as Ben Affleck did and get mad, shout, take the mick out of people, then I guess that is repression. If that reaction is repressed, yeah.
In this particular
Repression.
circumstance, obviously mastery of oneself is beneficial, is something to be lauded. But maybe Sam Harris is very low on the scale of neuroses. So maybe Sam Harris is a well-adjusted and mature individual.
Neuroses, as in the condition of being neurotic.
Yeah. So someone...
I don't know, you wouldn't describe Ben Affleck as being neurotic, would you?
No. But talking in this case, Sam Harris, let's just say he's very low down on the scale of neuroses.
Okay.
And he's a well adapted and mature individual. Who's yeah.
Not if you ask what's his name, Glenn Greenwald. But anyway,
Greenwald.
carry on.
Yeah. And let's let's look at a very neurotic individual. I can't actually think of any extremely neurotic individual from popular culture, but let's just say, a typical Dostoevskian, protagonist, or just a random 17-year-old angsty teenager who's just split up from they've just split up with their first girlfriend or boyfriend, and they're trying to learn mastery over their own train of thought.
Yeah.
Because they want this constant feeling of worthlessness and this constant existential crisis is bearing down on them. They've got constant feelings of insecurity and feelings of lacking self-worth and lacking self-esteem. So they're the mastery over themselves in order to make sure these kind of petty thoughts no longer afflict them. But they're by being able to control one's mental state in that way, they're almost no longer addressing the barbarian at the door. The barbarian, you can shut the door on the barbarian, but really what you want to do is open the door and then sort of either civilize the barbarian or just kill him.
That's really interesting, because the practice of meditation that Sam Harris that he advocates and which I use is called, I think it's Vipassana. I think it's Vipassana. Please don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
Google it, because I probably mispronounced it. So that practice involves very, very, very basically sitting comfortably and focusing on your breath. And when a thought arises, you categorize it as thinking, and then put it to one side and go back to the breath. And that seems to me it is both the act of controlling, but also of accepting your thoughts as they arise, rather than blocking things from arising in the first place. It's very interesting.
I think it was Ouspensky, who's one of Gurdjieff's disciples. I'm not sure if you know Gurdjieff.
No, I don't know.
To biographically explain Gurdjieff and his system of thought would be monumental. It would require hours. But
how do you spell him, just so that people listening can look him up if you want?
Gurdjieffff.
Cool.
I'm just going to quickly So Gurdjieffff, Gurdjieff, extremely famous sort of spiritual kind of leader of the early 20th century. Who
Russian?
Yeah, he was a Russian who advocated what you could call the fourth way.
The fourth way? Come on, we've already had the third way.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at that.
But anyway, I think it was Ouspensky who said identifying one's sort of petty and negative emotions is the best you can do to help sort of neutralize or defeat them. All you have to do is identify them. Once you've identified a thought as anger, or you've identified a thought as envy, suddenly it loses its kind of its power over you. Suddenly it's not, because then it's a thought. It's your mind speaking to you, saying oh, look at getting angry about a petty thing, like I can't believe somebody did that, or I can't believe this has happened, or oh my god. When you just go, that's anger, that's envy, that's rage, and then you still appreciate the fact that it is a valid emotion but because it falls under the category of anger, it's no longer given that prestige that it once had. It's kind of labelled, it's been pinned.
I definitely see what you mean, especially when we as people look at our motives. And I often see people, and I see in myself, how we pretend or even think that we're doing the good, when in fact we're just branding acting, as you say, on something like anger, something like envy, as the good. You see it all these political parties, whether they're jingoist, even the left. A lot of the time, you might say that there's a big strand in the left of branding greed, i.e., I want your money, give it to me now, as equity or equality. Yeah, that is really interesting. What was I thinking, John? Tell me.
Well, I saw your train of thought. We're talking about like controlling yourself as a person, an individual. Then got brought from the sort of micro to the macro, and you start talking about politics. You mentioned the left with some disdain.
Oh no, that's it. Don't kick the desk. The microphone's on the desk.
Oh.
Don't worry. Don't worry about. You were saying the other day about that Bukowski poem you read. Remember? The wormholed eyes, men.
Yeah, I can
get that, because that sounds exactly like what you were saying about repression.
Well, see, the poem is at first it's sort of Bukowski, very kind of personal poet, very kind of. He would describe himself as kind of anti-art, almost anti-pretentious. His poetry just consists of basic sentences with enjambment, but he kind of connects you because he's just eminently relatable, because he is just kind of an intelligent person, but not an intellectual, just kind of shrugging his shoulders and relaying his thoughts, as it were. But see, I've got like pretty much all of his poems, but it's kind of there's a hard addition to navigate. I'll tell you that. So D.H. Lawrence is a very kind of sensual writer who kind of exalted the working class in his time, exalted kind of manual labour, exalted kind of physical prowess and power. And yet he was he's a man who's a kind of pale, sickly, with wormhole eyes. Like he's not really, his writing really is just kind of a means to escape himself. It's a means to like write about who he wants to be and who he wishes he was. In reality, he's actually just a kind of sickly intellectual, full of nothing but kind of half-baked ideas, whilst writing about like the beauty and the kind of majesty of the sort of working class sexual acts.
So is that, so to speak, historically accurate on Bukowski's part to say that of D.H. Lawrence?
It's more of a Bukowski takes writers very personally. He takes them as if he's having a personal audience with them. He's not even looking at them historically. So he'll say things like Hemingway, that's my man. Like a bigger, he'll be kind of like Hemingway, but like I'm going to beat you here with this novel. Like I'm finally going to like I'm going to take you down in the ring, Hemingway, with this one. Like I finally written so you could never like surpass. Or he'll kind of like they'll talk about D.H. Lawrence and say like wonderful writer, but if I ever saw him in real life, I'd want to punch him in the face type thing. Like that's sort of Bukowski's style.
I'd punch D.H. Lawrence in the face.
Why would you punch D.H. Lawrence in the face?
He wrote Women in Love, right?
Yeah.
That was a terrible book. It's so boring.
I didn't mind Women in Love. D.H. Lawrence is one of my.
He's so bigged up. He's so. I think obviously the reputation I think comes from. Come on, what's it called? Lady Chatterley's Lover.
Yeah.
But and Women in Love supposedly was banned for obscenity. So there was me rubbing my hands together, thinking, finally we're onto the good stuff, and. No.
So anyway, this is the poem. It's the poem called I Liked Him by Charles Bukowski. I liked D.H. Lawrence. He could get so indignant. He snapped and he ripped with wonderfully energetic sentences. He could lay the word down, bright and writhing. There was the stink of blood and murder and sacrifice about him. The only tenderness he allowed was when he bedded down his large German wife. I liked D.H. Lawrence. He could talk about Christ like he was the man next door, and he could describe Australian taxi drivers so well you hated them. I liked D.H. Lawrence, but I'm glad I never met him in some bistro, him lifting his tiny hot cup of tea and looking at me with his wormhole eyes.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's funny because it almost sounds like a review in poetry and poetry form, although it does seem kind of libelous and slightly baseless. I mean, he's not bringing in any secondary material, so to speak. That was interesting.
He obviously Bukowski sort of despised academia and everything it stood for.
To be honest, mate, I've never read any Bukowski apart from what you've just read to me, and people say I do, and also people say that my writing is quite like reminds them of Bukowski. I don't want to say that I'm like Bukowski because that would just be blowing my own.
I wouldn't say so. I think you're more measured than Bukowski. I think
I'm more one-whole-eyed than Bukowski.
No, Bukowski doesn't use capital letters in a lot of his short stories. Like, isn't saying I believe in capital letters and stuff or punctuations.
What about full stops?
Full stops, yeah. But I mean, I've got a collection of his short stories over there, and in none of like half the short stories, he decides not to use capital letters at the start of a sentence. But in some of the others, he does. Like structurally and in terms of form, he just doesn't really care as long as the words are down there on the page. Nothing else really matters.
Interesting, because my editor went through Faux, the short story recently, and she removed all of the, you know those sentences. This is the meal I bought.
Yeah.
Or I would say, excuse me, that should be written. This is the meal that I bought.
Yeah.
Or the meal which I bought. And my editor went through the story, deleting all these that's.
Oh, right.
And it was the first time ever that my grammar has been, I don't know how you'd say it, defrocked. Obviously, in some senses, all those that's and all those whiches are superfluous, but to me, they felt entirely grammatically necessary. So I don't know. When my friend likened me to Bukowski, she might have been being a bit, I don't know, over complimentary for somebody who doesn't use capital letters.
Thematically, I think she's talking about there's a seediness to your story. Bukowski writes seedy.
Cool.
Bukowski's the sort of person who would write a short story, when he ever did not write that himself, about, someone who's in charge of a pawn shop, getting involved in some kind of shady business.
Cool.
And Bukowski's an urban writer. He says that, trees bore him. He says, green bores me. What I'm interested in is neon signs and hookers outside of doors and drunks, rolling on the street. That's beautiful, not...
It's a pity he never saw Liverpool at this iteration.
He would certainly have loved Liverpool at this iteration.
Do you remember when we were out? Was it last week? Maybe a bit more ago?
When we went clubbing?
Yeah.
Oh, that was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so when Joel and I went out, I think I got insulted by random people a total of 3 times. I don't know why, but there just seemed to be an animosity in the air somehow. It was most unpleasant. But last night, all I did was a friend and I hung out for a bit, went to a few pubs, and then she went to the station, went home, and I walked from the station, from Central Station, all the way up to the top of to the bottom of Hardman Street. So that, if you don't know Liverpool, is kind of walking from almost very near the centre of the clubbing area to the outskirts of the clubbing area. And it was so nice. There were 3 buskers playing guitar. The buskers are very savvy. They set up near cash machines and play sort of acoustic guitar versions of chart and club songs, and do really well. It was just so much nicer. I don't know what it was. What was the weather like? Am I right in remembering that it was kind of gloomy and stuffy? The weather.
It was just very mild. That's all I remember.
Oh, because it was mild last night. But anyway, it was much, much nicer, and people were so much friendlier. Bloody breath of fresh air.
Oh, right. So Bukowski's view on art is summed up in a poem called Art. The poem is, as the spirit wanes, the form appears.
Wow. That's almost just a pound, isn't it? As the spirit wanes, the form appears. So is he saying that we emphasise form at the expense of spirit?
He he's kind of in league with Kerouac unofficially, very unofficially. Didn't like the guy, you know. Said he would have punched him in the face if he ever saw him, type thing.
on William Bukowski's punch in the face list.
Bukowski,
Charles Bukowski.
yeah, he was William Burroughs was actually once in the same hotel as him, and he said he was so like uninterested and kind of bored at William Burroughs' existence that he just kind of walked past him without saying anything.
What? Come on. if I ever came near the guy who thought that language was a virus from space, I would go up and say hi, you know, let's get a pint. What the hell?
But anyway, what I was trying to say,
sounds like a real dick.
He was. He liked to think of himself as an arsehole. He used to say, I call myself an arsehole to de-weapon other people, to disarm them. Because I've already said it myself. But he did think he was a dick as well. But he was unofficially in league with people like Kerouac and Ginsberg. That was my phone.
that was very eerie.
Anyway, he was unofficially in a league with these people who, like the Beats, for example, like Kerouac, famously took amphetamines, drank coffee, stayed for 16 hours, got a long roll of paper and just wrote for 16 hours. Just wrote whatever came to his head, and even if he wouldn't let form or syntax or get in the way, he would just write. And if the syntax wasn't correct, who cared? Like, it was more naturalistic. Bukowski's kind of in that league, that he believes it's the essence and the spirit of the writing,
like that, wasn't it?
Yeah. All of his work's like that. It gets increasingly more experimental until there are no full stops. Well, there are full stops like once every 2 pages.
Like Milton.
like Milton, only it's not poetry, it's prose.
Wow.
But yeah, so Bukowski believes that the spirit, the essence of what you're writing is what's important. The form just kind of gets in the way. The form's just this meaningless straitjacket that like professors have kind of, you know, applied to poetry and prose, and we should just kind of forget about it. But
do you know what he thought about music?
Oh yeah, I know what I thought about music. He elevated music to a level above.
But what about form in music?
Interestingly, his favourite, he was a big classical buff.
Wow.
And he
That's really interesting.
Yeah, he despised the Beatles. Because he was in his 60s, 70s, despised, you know, the Beach Boys, despised any of the, you know, the Doors. There's a short story where the Doors is being played at a party, and he's just like, you know, what is this shit? Where's Marla?
Wow. That's so interesting because his thesis, if I'm summarising it correctly, seems to be that the craft, the form within literature, i.e. your a blank verse, iambic pentameter, rhyme, even grammar, is unimportant. But if you took that away from any that in classical music and Baroque music and to a large extent Romantic music is totally integrated with any kind of meaning that you want to derive. Like at the moment, I'm looking at the last fugue from the Art of Fugue by Bach for my dissertation, and precisely what I'm looking at is the occurrence of the theme, for which the musical notes spell out in German notation Bach's name. So you know in sort of what you might call English classical music, the notes go from A to G, I think. Not like A to G. Yes, A to G. I really should know that. But in German, instead of B and E, they have H and S, which means that Bach can spell in 4 notes his own name, B-A-C-H. And I'm looking at, in this last fugue that he wrote, the occurrence of that theme, B-A-C-H, where it comes, what it means, the different bits of music with which it's harmonized. And that is absolutely 100% form, and that is craft. That is, to me, on the same level as the sonnet structure, the grammar, the references between texts. So it seems almost hypocritical for Bukowski.
Or it betrays a contradictory kind of philosophy. But it kind of, Bukowski's not a man who has like an actual system of thought. He's a man who has vague ideas of which kind of weave in and out without any real like consistency. But
like Christopher Hitchens.
Bit like Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah, if you aggregated
suppose
all
so,
the things
yeah.
that he
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
or even all of the things that he said in, say, 1 week, they'd be entirely contradictory.
Yeah. Well, what does Walt Whitman say in Leaves of Grass? I contain multitudes. Everyone contains multitudes. So that's just really expression of that.
Interesting. But I to guide the conversation back to myself again, as it
Yeah.
should always do. I think the fact that I really enjoy, say, bands like Nine Inch Nails and say a song like Closer, and I really enjoy Bach, and I think I can justify that enjoying those things at the same time, maybe even one after the other, by without denigrating one or being inconsistent. I think that form and craft and the a really intense structure wherein all the layers the same patterns are found on all the layers is very important, but not entirely necessary. I don't know. Maybe we're just all inconsistent, and what matters is just what we like. But who cares?
Most purveyors of art care.
Purveyors.
You know.
Purveyors are we all, who would rise thus nimbly by a true king's fall. Sorry, carry on.
I remember when I first lectured at university, professor we were talking about the sonnet, and how if you try and write a poem and you follow the structure of the sonnet, you're going to write something that's more competent than if you just go freestyle.
Competent?
Competent, yeah.
As in, what does he mean by that?
It's going more appreciable as poetry because it's a more difficult task to do, and to fulfil the criteria of a sonnet, it requires more creativity because you have to like jump over these kind of loops, jump through the loops,
That's really interesting because
obstacles.
I don't know about anybody else, but I can write the crappiest sonnet you can imagine.
Yeah.
Easy. I mean, come on, 14 lines, iambic pentameter. You choose your rhyme, with your Shakespeare, Petrarchy, and whatever. Easy peasy. It can. I've read monstrous sonnets that comply with that form. I would disagree. I would say that almost the opposite is the case. That it's quite easy sometimes to slip under the carpet poor ideas, poor poetry, poor description under the almost a disguise of compliance with a very famous form. I mean, I heard a poem in the form of a sonnet about a sonnet, and how this process that you're describing, i.e., how the difficulty of complying with a particular form makes things good, and it was crap. I think it's one could say more of an achievement to create something whose form derives from the narrative and other things rather than just the rhyme scheme and the meter. At the same time, I think that so much poetry as well is just prose. It's just prose with when people just hit enter randomly.
That's what I was saying about Bukowski's poetry. It's just a sentence with enjambment.
Yeah.
That's it.
Exactly. And I mean, I don't know. Would you say it's poetry? I suppose that's a question.
Well, when we get into this whole debate about what is poetry, I find that a lot of hot air is blowing from my mouth because
is it even an interesting discussion?
It's a very fascinating discussion. This is a discussion in which I almost feel that it's almost self-evident. I want to just be very banal and really boring with this one and just kind of say that prose has no enjambment. That's it. And then prose poetry is poetry without enjambment, and it's poetry because it's elevating the lyrical over the semantic.
Interesting.
But I suppose anything that elevates the lyrical over the semantic is poetry.
I hate to sound like a pseudo, but I think sometimes that there isn't really a distinction. That it's just an axis with, each work is a point on that axis with, say, Paradise Lost at one end and, I don't know, God knows, journalistic articles at the other end. And I think unlike, say, a scientific definition, wherein you you create that definition, describe what characteristics something has to have in order to fit within that definition, and move on. This seems to be that we have the word, we attribute things to that word, and are trying to create a definition, which I think is a fool's errand. It's almost impossible.
The entry of Christ into Liverpool. If we're talking about Liverpool, we're talking about poetry.
And Christ. Bukowski.
And we're talking about Christ as well. And this poem, written by Adrian Henry, The Entry of Christ into Liverpool. City morning, dandelion seeds blowing from waste ground, smell of overgrown, priv the edges, children's voices in the distance, sounds from the river, round the corner into Myrtle Street, Saturday morning, shoppers' headscarves, shopping baskets, dogs, then down the hill, the sound of trumpets, cheering and shouting in the distance, children running, ice cream vans, flags breaking out over buildings, black and red, green and yellow, Union Jacks, English red ensigns, long live socialism, stretched against the blue sky over St. George's Hall. Now the procession, the marching drums, hideous masked, brutal faces of old ladies in the crowd, yellow masks of girls in curlers and headscarves, smelling of factories, masks, 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 red masks, purple masks, pink masks, crushing, surging, carrying me along down the hill, past the Philharmonic, the Labour Exchange, excited feet crushing the geraniums in St. Luke's Gardens, placards, banners, posters, keep Britain white, end the war in Vietnam, God bless our Pope, billboards hoarding drawings on pavements, words painted on the road, stop, go, halt, the sound of pipes and drums down the street, little girls in yellow and orange dresses, paper flowers, embroidered banners, loyal sons of King William Lodge, Bootle, masks, more masks, crowding in off buses, standing on walls, climbing fences. Familiar faces among the ground, faces of my friends, the shades of Pierre Bonnard and Guilherme Apollinaire. Jarry cycling carefully through the crowd, a black cat picking her way underfoot, posters, signs, gleaming salads, Coleman's mustard, Jeon Saw, Fabricou and mosques. Hail Jesus, King of the Jews, straining forward to catch a glimpse through the crowd, red hair, white robe, grey donkey, familiar face, traffic lights, zebra crossings. Guinness is... White bird dying unnoticed in a corner, splattered feathers, blood running merged with the neo signs in a puddle. Guinness is good. Guinness is good for masks, 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 masks. Guinness is good for you. Brass bands cheering, loudspeakers blaring, clatter of police horses. All power to the Constituent Assembly. Masks cheering, glittering teeth, daffodils trodden underfoot. Butchers of Jerusalem, banners cheering, drunk, stumbling and singing, masks, masks, masks. Evening, then sickle moon, pale blue sky flecked with bright orange clouds, streamers, newspapers, discarded paper hats, blown slowly back up the hill by the evening wind, dustmen with big brooms sweeping the gutters, last of the crowds waiting at bus stops, giggling schoolgirls, quiet businessmen, me walking home, empty chip papers drifting around my feet.
Wow, who was that?
Adrian Henry, Liverpool poets. I'm reading this an anthology called The Mersey Sound, which they were colloquially known as the Liverpool poets, and they were the parallel of the beats in Britain. Liverpool had the the Mersey beat, and they had the same kind of sort of oral poetry scene.
Oh, cool. It was really interesting. Martin Amis is often identified that he, for those who aren't with us, i.e. those who aren't Joel or me, Joel just threw that book from his hand into a pile by his bed like a real badass. So Martin Amis, who was often identified, and he described how he would use events from his life to make his novels. He would say that the process was to take events from his life and make them comply with form, to formalise them. The events in one's life usually take a sporadic, random journey, and Martin Amis would take such events and make them comply with the beginning, middle, end, style of a story, etc. And that poem just sounds like somebody has just remembered what happened when they went into town one day and wrote it down. They didn't. There's no craft. There's no form. I mean, you read what you want, but to me, they've only done half a job. And I mean, obviously, I can't go. When was that written? 50s, 60s.
60s.
I can't go into Liverpool in the 60s. So in some ways, it's an interesting historical document. But obviously, I may be missing something because I haven't close read it, I haven't analysed it, and it could be that there's a million hidden references.
The Liverpool Poets' idea was to write popular poetry, the sort of poetry that can be enjoyed by the masses. That was their aim.
Okay, but yeah, to me that just seems like, as was it Truman Capote said, typing, not writing.
No, of Kerouac.
He said that of Kerouac.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yes, he said that of
On the Road,
didn't he? Yeah. Okay, listen to this. I've seen the exact manner in which the junk virus operates through 15 years of addiction. The pyramid of junk, one level eating the level below. It is no accident that junk higher-ups are always fat, and the addict in the street is always thin. Right up to the top, or tops, since there are many junk pyramids feeding on peoples of the world, and all built on basic principles of monopoly. Never give anything for nothing. Never give more than you have to give. Always catch the buyer hungry, and always make him wait. Always take everything back if you possibly can. The pusher, always get it all back. I don't know whether that's a typo. You heard correctly. The pusher, always get it all back. The addict needs more and more junk to maintain a human form. Buy off the monkey. Now that's prose, but it's almost poetry, and in some ways I don't know in what way we should maintain the distinction.
It's prose with a lyrical element, but it's not prose that's elevating the lyricism above the semantics.
Yeah, maybe not.
Maybe not. I'm just Occam's razoring this.
Yeah. Have you read Naked Lunch?
Yeah.
Good man.
I read
blew my mind. I got this new book in town, read the introduction in town in Cardiff, and I was like, wow, this is something. And I took it and read it sitting on a stile in rural mid Wales, and was like, Jesus Christ, what he just seems to be writing from somewhere else, other than what people have been using before and after. He was old, wasn't he? Boris?
He was in his late 80s.
Yeah. It obviously seemed not, I would say, to dampen his writing abilities. But at the same time, it wasn't as though he was writing from some, I don't know. Please, if any medical professionals are listening, please, write in to correct me. It seems as though he wasn't writing from those faculties which might be destroyed by. Am I just talking total crap? I.e. that he's writing from a different place, that which wouldn't be destroyed by long-term drug abuse. Is that just total bullshit?
What you're potentially saying is that long-term drug abuse is never going to be able to, is not going to stifle that imaginative faculty from which is prose issues, but it will stifle that kind of the logic.
Okay. Ha! No logic in that. You won't find any logic in Burroughs. That's interesting. Because obviously one mustn't conflate these things. So far as I know, opiates have some quite bad physical symptoms, obviously to do with the digestion, circulation, that sort of thing. But correct me if I'm wrong, Joel. They don't have a particular mental effect other than withdrawal. They don't send you loopy like too much LSD can.
That's largely, but not entirely true. Opiates can induce hallucination. They induce a dream state. It's called. Have you ever heard of the term nodding?
Yeah, when you take and you just sort of go
No, not. Well, it's kind of basically you go in and out of dreams. So I took tramadol. It is legal. So,
stop incriminating yourself.
Legal. This is
legal.
Okay,
fair enough.
This is legal. It's perfectly legal. And what happens is that you relapse into a state in which you begin to sort of your daydreams become actual dreams. So your mind just you actually kind of half believe you're in the daydream because you're kind of half asleep, but you're not fully asleep. And every now and again you twitch, and then suddenly you go back to reality and you're like, oh, what's happening? Like, and you go back in the dream state, and then suddenly you twitch. Like, I think that it almost behooves something that's not psychologically healthy. It's not it's not directly and neurologically kind of damaging in the same way that MDMA is genuinely a threat to kind of serotonin production. But it does mean that you're kind of living in a dream world. That can't be healthy.
Even when you're like off the drug, so to speak.
If you're off the drug, but you've been taking it frequently, I think that any kind of exit from reality and lucidity is a funny game, and that to do this continuously exit reality to enter the kind of dreamscape of opiates. In fact, Kubla Khan by Coleridge, that is based off dream he had, kind of opium induced dream. Yeah, that's the sort of stuff that happens. Dreaming of measureless caverns, of Kubla Khan or whatever. But I don't know. I don't think it's psychologically healthy.
Wow. Internet trolls face 2 years in jail. What do you think about that?
It's draconian, obviously. It's just completely draconian. But these internet trolls are the ones that usually get sentenced. They're these strange trolls who kind of send death threats, but in order to troll.
But you know that people's accounts have been taken down, who really aren't trolls. Like the YouTube guy Thunderfoot.
No, but go on.
His Twitter account was taken down for supposed trolling or at least a breach of the code of conduct. And it's so subjective about what isn't. Obviously, you and I both heartily disagree with anybody being mean to each other on the internet, and I can say that both of us have been subject to a lot of vitriol, swearing, and personal abuse on the internet. But we don't, we don't really like take that as a chip on our shoulder. But I am slightly uncomfortable because it's just so subjective, and
it's being punished for using words, which is always a dangerous and slippery slope. No one should ever be punished for using words.
Well, I mean, come on, you can't go out on the street and hurl racial epithets at people. That's wrong, isn't it?
It's morally wrong, but it shouldn't be legally wrong.
Really?
Words, yeah? You're causing someone offence. Offence should not be enough of a problem to warrant legal action. Offence. Anything that's non-physical, anything that's verbal, because then you start saying, what's racial offence? Someone, okay, you're thinking of someone walking out of the street and shouting genuine racial slurs in someone's face in an aggressive and hostile manner that intimidates them.
So obviously,
but then as soon as this law becomes in place, suddenly it becomes subjective. Because suddenly someone could casually make a racial joke, someone could claim racial offence, claim a hate crime, and as soon as you start making words illegal, you get into a slippery slope. Actions, yes. Words, no.
I think. Okay. Put it this way: are there some words which can themselves be defined as actions? I would say yes.
No.
Come on, man! Shouting death to corn merchants to an angry mob outside a corn merchant's house, to quote John Stuart Mill. Surely that is an action. Incitement is an action.
Incitement is an action.
Yeah.
And it is an action of such, but it's words that are it's words that are desiring an action. It's words that don't have the template of an action but are looking for it. It's words that are beseeching action to come forth, but still words nonetheless. If anyone did get incited by those words, then they'd be breaking the law, whilst they remain just words. Words, people should be able to say whatever they want. That does not mean that it's not morally wrong. That doesn't mean that the community shouldn't shun someone. So if I go outside and start, racially abusing someone, I should be rightly shunned, should be rightly challenged, and so on and so forth. But I shouldn't be, the state shouldn't come down on me just for using words. Words are both sacred and non-sacred. They're sacred in the sense that they're words, and one should never really, start using governmental forces to control the words. But at the same time, words are not sacred. Words are just words. Let's just leave words alone.
That's a really interesting one. Have you seen Doug Stanhope's little comedy skit that he does, "Fuck the Jews"?
No.
It's really, really funny, and it's kind of awkward because obviously you're used to going, "Oh, you can't say that," but he makes a really interesting argument about the things that the Jews do and get away with it, like obviously certain sort of I don't know what you could sort of call it, conservative Jews who insist upon marrying only Jews, which he said is really racist and anti outsiders. And yeah, if you quoted him saying "fuck the Jews" and put that in the papers and stuff, it would be like, Doug Stanhope, neo-Nazi, Doug Stanhope, racist, blah blah blah. But it is absolutely so one, subjective, and two, contextual, because it was a joke. And as you say, I'm not sure that we can legislate that. But at the same time, there are just these horrible people who are that I've heard things about. They say disgusting, horrible things, and then when they get blocked, they'll set up a new account and just carry on doing it. So it's not like you have the choice to not listen or to block or to just move away. It's that these guys will follow you wherever you go. Okay, here is a talking point. Germaine Greer, The Whole Women. Ms. Greer argued that attempts to outlaw female genital mutilation amounted to an attack on cultural identity, which is, to me, that is the archetype of multiculturalism gone wrong. I.e., it's not fair to say that white culture is not white culture. White British culture is the best. But Germaine Greer, at least in that book, has taken that so far as to say that we can't comment on when other cultures are doing something patently really, really, really bad to innocent children. She's just basically taken the multicultural axiom way too far. Comments?
I think it should be right to criticise anything, and therefore there should be no like holiness or kind of sacrosanct element to other cultures. Just because I'm white and I'm criticising a feature of Arab or Muslim or Jewish indeed culture doesn't mean that I'm appealing to some sort of racist or prejudicial sentiment. I'm appealing to my own reason. But at the same time, one has to kind of wonder why such a practice has existed in the culture for so long.
Female genital mutilation?
Yeah.
Well, that's you could do a whole bloody podcast on that.
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
But
exactly, you can do a whole podcast on that, and therefore it's just a funny one, because I feel that there are many aspects of other cultures. Like I was criticising Japan's kind of racial isolationism earlier.
Okay, sorry, hang on. I've just brought up the Wikipedia page because I don't like it, because that article that I read was from like 1999, so I don't want to make Germaine. Don't want to apply to the modern Germaine Greer what the 1999 Germaine Greer said.
Yeah.
So this is to quote Wikipedia. In fact, Greer was opposed to the practice and said that feminists fighting to eliminate female genital mutilation in their own countries must be supported, but she had explored some of the complexities of the issue and the double standards of the West, and warned against using the issue to reinforce our notions of cultural superiority.
Anyway, as I was criticising Japan's body isolation first, but at the same time, as I was saying with Ireland, it's almost as if one country has to look inside itself autonomously and find harmony within itself, and not have this harmony imposed by an external force. Because I can commentate and discuss, and not have a pint down the pub and talk about different aspects of which culture kind of I don't like, or this, that, and the other. By not being my culture, I am not responsible for its failings, and I can't address its failings. That's the decision of the members of that culture. I can't, deliver democracy with drone strikes.
Yeah, you can. bomb them into democracy. So what you're saying that it's idle. This kind of our conversations about other cultures are an idle politics.
Kind of. I mean, obviously, it's a discussion that can help us reflect on our own culture. But then multiculturalism complicates this issue. So let's just pretend we're living in a world where every culture and every nation is homogenous. That no one from Eritrea or from Eritrean origins, or who believes in or subscribes to Eritrean culture, it lives in Britain, and vice versa. Then I have no impact on them. It's not my culture. I do not address it. I can talk about it, and I can think about it, and I can criticise it, but I can't change it because it's nothing to do with me.
Don't you think that between different nations we have a global conversation about how we should act, what we should do? Say, for example, on the drug issue, in America, lots of states now are legalising cannabis, and obviously American legislators have no right to make British laws, but we can look at America and the debate that they're having and the points that their commentators are making and say, hang on, Colorado has legalised marijuana, and it hasn't been like a huge nuclear explosion on that state. It's been, pretty much okay. Obviously, time will tell. So wouldn't you say that the comments of other cultures on each other are valid? Moreover, wouldn't you say that it's useful to have an outsider's perspective on any given culture?
It's useful. It's indeed useful. But what I was going to say is that multiculturalism confuses the issue. So we're coexisting with cultures that would find genital mutilation acceptable, but because it's within our own
cases,
within our own society, our own nation, therefore it's something that we should address by looking inside ourselves, because suddenly ourselves now incorporates this element. That changes matters.
So
we're not criticising other cultures. We're almost criticising our own culture if we are truly multicultural.
Sorry, I'm not quite on your wavelength.
So, in a purely homogenous world, I'm criticising from afar, and this culture does not belong to my culture, and I cannot change it directly. And
but you can change.
But in a multicultural society, these practices are going on. Like, whilst if I look inside of myself, if Britain as an entity contains these cultural elements.
Inside of you?
No, not inside of me.
Well, you said inside of yourself.
As I said, inside of myself as Britain as an entity.
That's the sound of my brain coming out of my ears.
Okay, yeah, I've kind of fallen off the
What the fuck are you talking about, dude?
I don't know. I'm trying to find something to say about this topic because I don't have anything to say about it. So I'm just kind of blowing air. That's what I'm saying, it's just idle chatter.
Idle chatter. Okay, I think we've had enough idle chatter for this episode of the Faux-Cast. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Joel, for talking to me. It's been great fun, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Goodbye.